Hello everyone, and welcome to another Half Pint session. You might not be able to see it, but the Pints for Jack logo is on here. I've been looking for a mug like this for ages. Next time I record one of these, I'll do it with a nice dark beer so you can see it in all its beauty. But I'm glad I got a good drink with me today, because today we are talking to Maureen, who wrote this wonderful little book. Maybe not that little, but Maureen, welcome to the show.
Hello, David. I'm very glad, very honoured to be on the show.
Well, I heard about your book, and I've got to admit, I thought it was going to be a very different kind of book than what it was. It was pitched to me as C.S. Lewis being an unexpected detective in Oxford. And so I thought it was going to be something quite different. But I cracked open your book and I started reading it. And I found way more references, detailed references to the Inklings and Oxford life. The world is much more textured than I was expecting. I was expecting a few things to be thrown my way, a few little pieces of Inklings trivia, but it was much richer than I thought. And as I got about a third of the way through, I started noticing the tone and the world was real and gritty. And so I don't get to read a whole lot of books leisurely, but I happen to be away in Chicago and therefore away from toddlers. So I actually got to sit down and read this. And so I was reading this on the train to and from Chicago, and I absolutely loved it. So I want to talk to you about that today. But before we get to the book itself, can you just fill in your background? Who are you? What's been your background prior to this book?
Right. Well, I'm a national newspaper and magazine journalist, and I've been working in journalism since the 1970s. I've written two non-fiction books before now. I was asked to write a history of the Women of the Year lunch, which was really the story of a famous lunch held in London every year. Really the story of women's work in the 20th century, both paid and unpaid. And one of the founders of the Women of the Year lunch was Odette, wartime spy. I mean, how cool is that? Fantastic. So I did that, and I also wrote an unauthorized, as the publisher called it, because technically it was, biography of Alan Rickman.
Oh.
He wrote me two very nice letters. He'd started out as a graphic artist before he went to RADA and became an actor. At the age of 26, he went to RADA. So he wrote this wonderful calligraphy in these notes, which I treasure. You know, I will never, ever give these notes away. But he said he didn't want to look back over his life. But the important thing was he didn't stop me doing my book. And in fact, one of his best friends, a collaborator, the writer and director Peter Barnes, said much better to do an unauthorized one because it's more objective. So there we are. And that was fascinating to do. And I kind of thought I'd got an idea for towards the when was it? Towards about 10 years ago, I had an idea. No, a bit longer than that. I had an idea for a series of murders in an old people's home.
You got to be careful the way you said that. I had an idea for a series of murders in an old people's home.
But my agent at the time said, old people's home. You know, I mean, she was not a young person herself, but she didn't like the idea. Anyway, we all know what happened, Richard Osman. Although the murders didn't actually take place in his old retired people's home, but the inhabitants, of course, solved murders. So anyway, he's done very well with that. But as they say, there's no new idea under the sun, really. But anyway, so I kind of put that to one side. Although I've got this hero called Mac that I would still like to revive one day. A hero with a gammy leg and an attitude. Anyway, then I decided journalism is all-consuming, and I went freelance in 1998, and I've written for my work has been published in, slightly different from working for. My work has been published in every national newspaper in England, except the FT. That's still
Murder at the Stock Exchange.
still
That might be
they do
something to
have
work in later.
but I'd started interviewing a lot of authors, and including Chris Brookmeyer, Anne Cleves, crime writers, and both authors, Nikki French, which is Sean French, and his wife Nikki Gerard, or alternatively Nikki Gerard and her husband Sean French, um, and thoroughly enjoyed. And I thought writing about them. And it was at the back of my mind. I can't say there was a eureka moment when I sprang out of the bath and said, that's it. But I thought, how about if there was a collision between two different worlds, town and gown, in the late 1940s, Oxford, when C.S. Lewis was a don at Oxford, Magdalen College, and unbeknown to him, my mother was going to come along in a few years' time and stay in a place that probably none of the dons or anyone at the university really knew about. Although I've given it a new name in my book, and it's much more sinister than the place was. The place was bleak, but it wasn't sinister. So I thought, what if those two worlds collided? Because we read a lot of books about the dreaming spires, the picturesque side of Oxford. Mm-hmm. But we don't often read about working class Oxford, certainly not historically. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I thought, what if Lewis's star student, who happens to be female, disappears one day, and with the help of a college servant's daughter, they called them scouts, they still do actually, college servant's daughter, who has become friendly with the missing student, he goes to find out what's happened, because there are all sorts of sinister rumours about what's happening at Rake Hall. Now, my missing student is called Susan. The scout's daughter is called Lucy. Susan has an elder brother called Peter. And there is a nasty character called Eddie. So
I did chuckle as we were going through it. As soon as I saw the first one, Lucy, I went, "Oh, I think I can predict 3 other names that I'm going to encounter before the end of this book."
Well, this is my story. And you could say that there's a certain villainous character a couple of them who you could link to characters that created by Lewis. But really, this is my version, and it's an adult story. It's not a children's story. So I just wanted to have allusions throughout so that it could be a little bit multi-layered, I hope, for people who love Lewis. And he himself is so multi-layered. You know, I was listening to the podcast with Jem Bloomfield, and that was fascinating, talking about, I've also read From Spare Room to Wardrobe, great book. You know, fantastic to read about the influences that Lewis had. But I thought, okay, we know about the Celtic and the Norse mythologies that influenced him, and the Greek and the Roman. But what if he was also influenced by contemporary events? After the war, Britain was a very bleak place. I mean, the local Yanks at the RAF stations, you know, they were always coming round with chewing gum and nylons and whatever else, you know, distributing their largesse to grateful female members of the population. And it was a pretty rationing. It was in force until the early 1950s, and people were hungry. And of course, where there are shortages, crime is going to flourish. So there were profiteers, gangsters, razor gangs as well. Someone has suggested that there weren't any razor gangs in Oxford; they were just in London, but they are now. So there we are. In my version,
progress.
And anyway, I just thought, what if there are all these influences coming to bear upon what Lewis experienced? As well as the cinema. He wasn't a cineast. I can't really find out whether his brother was, but I'm making Warney a regular cinema goer, which suits the plot. And he would Sorry.
I couldn't speak to the cinema, but I definitely know that he watched a reasonable amount of television because he
Yeah,
watched the Narnia adaptation,
yeah,
the
that's right.
one from the 1960s, and absolutely
Yeah,
loved it.
that's right. Anyway, but I just thought, what if Warner would come back from the cinema, and of course, films would be played on a loop. You could watch a film if you've missed the beginning of it. You could just hang on until it came round again
Uh,
in the same afternoon or whatever. I don't do that now, but um, what if Warney came back with stories of gangsters, American gangsters, fantastic film noir, femme fatale? We know that Lewis noticed the beauty of women. He was very much a man who lived in the real world. Um, he was a man of great principle, but he did understand about temptation, such as the Screwtape Letters, of course. I enjoyed Emily Wilson Hassan's take on that with her book, Sincerely Stoneheart. So to me, it raised the stakes if your hero, your detective hero, is a man of faith, because when he's tempted, it's a very big deal. And if he manages to resist temptation in all sorts of ways. So there I thought I thought he will be a good choice as a detective, but that's up to the reader to decide. But also, he just has, from his writings, we know, those that love Lewis and his writings, he has such an amazing understanding of human nature. It's extraordinary what he does write about. I found the text of a sermon he gave at St Jude's Church, not far away from where I live in North London. And he was talking about the virgin birth and the actual biological act of procreation, more or less the same sentence, which is amazing, really. And I'm kind of using that to suggest that someone was quite offended by that. But Lewis was a plain speaking man of the people. That's what people loved about him. That's why
mm.
you'll get masses of letters from fans of his broadcasts, and including, as you know, the collected letters, distraught women whose husbands had been unfaithful. I mean, here is in 1947, he's near to his 50th birthday, an old-fashioned bachelor. And what does he know about divorce? He does his best with his advice. And he was a remarkable, remarkable man of many parts. And I've just added another part.
One I'm sure that I think he could have fitted into quite easily. But he also gets some help along the way, not least from Dorothy L. Sayers. It was lovely to see
Yeah,
her make an appearance.
yeah. And I've tried, and she's in the second book, which will be out next year. But I'm trying to be respectful to a great writer and scholar, but I've also tried to be playful. And I tease him a bit, and so does Dorothy.
As I'm sure it happened. I think there's enough evidence in the letters that they like
He's,
sparring a little.
yeah, he himself had a great sense of humour anyway. Yeah, he was not what we call in Britain a po-faced man.
This is true.
How do I translate that for an American audience?
I don't know. I don't actually try and translate too often for Americans. I figure British slang is the best in the world, so there should be more of it here.
Anyway, I just wanted to explore the humanity of the man, because detectives have to understand human nature, and they've really got to like and be interested in people, even though they meet some absolute horrors along the way. And they've got to have a good nose for danger. And Lewis was a bit of an outsider at Magdalen in the university in general. First of all, he was an Irishman, quite proud of being Irish. And he and Warney would go, I'm sure you know, would go back to Ireland every year for hearty walking holidays in the mountains of Mourne, which was supposed to influence the landscape of Narnia. Anyway, so therefore I thought, I hoped that he would make a very good detective. He's also good at catching out plagiarism by students as well. So he had, as I say, he had a very good nose for deceit. And so that was really my starting point. I'm such a Narnia nut that I tracked down Pauline Baynes before she died, the woman who drew Narnia. And that was
Really?
wonderful. And it was it's like dance with the man who danced with the girl who danced with the Prince of Wales, or touch the garment of someone who drew for C.S. Lewis. Incredible. She was a very unassuming, lovely woman, widowed by then. She said something interesting. She said when she first met Lewis, because he had to approve the illustrator, of course, and she'd done Farmer Giles of Ham first. He said, apparently he said, not to her face, but to publisher, too pretty, too pretty. So perhaps he thought she would be a distraction, but I'm trying to adhere to the Raymond Chandler maxim for Philip Marlowe, down these mean streets a man must go, and I discovered quite a few mean streets in Oxford. A man must go who is neither tarnished nor afraid. And my C.S. Lewis does his best not to be tarnished, but he is sometimes afraid.
Yeah. I think probably my favorite thing about the book is it's almost what Lewis would have called the Kappa element of romance. It's the environment.
Thank you.
And because I've read a good deal of Lewis, a good deal of biographies,
You certainly have.
I've lived in England, I've visited Oxford on more than one occasion. One of the things that I think your book will give people that read it, a real sense of the world in which he lived. And not least of which was the fact that rationing was still going on. The very reason for all of the black market and the gangsters in your story is because rationing went on a long time in England, well after the war.
Yeah. I mean, people would say, it's a famous saying, but people would say, who won the war? Because they felt as if they were, they felt quite aggrieved by it. And some of his American fans would send Lewis and his brother food parcels.
Hams in particular.
Which he distributed, he felt rather guilty about that. I mean, there's something so endearing about the man. There really is. I mean, I love my Mr. Lewis, I must say. He wasn't a professor until he got to Cambridge. Should have been, but wasn't offered a professorship till then. But he kept saying, I'm Mr. Lewis, just plain Mr. Lewis. I also set it in the 1940s, because late 1940s, because he was still a bachelor then, hadn't met Joy Davidman Gresham, who was to become his first and only wife. Late marriage, which of course became the subject of Shadowlands, a wonderful drama, which I first encountered as a TV drama, then it became a stage drama, then it became a film. Joss Ackland played Joss Ackland,
his version is my favourite. He also has a wonderful version of Screw Tape.
Yeah, and Jane Lapater was Joy. Yeah. But so I thought, if he had a wife around, he might start asking awkward questions when he goes off on these nocturnal visits or whatever he's doing, to discover the mystery at Rake Hall. And I just thought, no, let's make it his last bachelor years. Although he does have a very possessive invalid lady at home, who was Mrs. Janie Moore, the mother of his dead friend Paddy from the First World War. And that's another thing that kind of seemed to play into my idea of him as a detective, because Lewis had seen active service in the First World War. He knew one end of a gun from another. He was invalided out, first with trench fever, and later he was wounded by shrapnel from friendly fire. And the shrapnel actually wasn't extricated from him until, I think, 1945. So he'd also served in the Home Guard during the Second World War. So this was a man who'd done his citizen's duty. He wasn't living in some ivory tower all the time. He really had done his duty. I have him quoting the quote, "We have heard the chimes at midnight." Justice Shallow. It's wonderful. Henry IV Part 1, I believe it is, yeah, anyway. But all those midnight patrols in the Home Guard. So there was really, he wasn't some sort of, I hate to say, useless academic. I mean, academics are not useless. Some of my best friends are academics, but
Some of them are.
He could be a man of action if he needed to be, although he wasn't really in the best of health. But by the time my story starts, my first book starts, Minto, Mrs. Jamie Moore, sorry, I haven't explained all that. She's nicknamed Minto because she loved mint sweets. But she was, as I said, the mother of his dead friend Paddy Moore from the First World War. He and Paddy had made a pact, each to look after the other's parents if either of them were killed in the war. And that's as a result. Mrs. Moore, Minto, lived with Jack, as he was called, of course, to family and friends for the rest of her life. And she died in 1951. So only then was he actually free to pursue a relationship, because there were various signs in the writings, the letters and so on, that she was quite a peevish and jealous person. As an invalid, that made things worse because she was feeling quite vulnerable and frail. But she was not easy to live with, and Morley detested her, seemed to absolutely detest her, and thought that she made Jack her slave, getting him to do housework and so on around the place. The house that they owned, the three of them, they all pitched in the money for the kilns outside Oxford in Headington. So you have a jealous female in his life. She's just a mother figure. There are some people who think that she was 26 years older than him, and some people think she might have been more to him before he became a Christian, when he was a young man. But I've decided to leave that to people to make up their own minds. There has been speculation in the various biographies, but anyway, I did a lot of research because I was born in 1951, and things weren't that much different in 1947. No, I didn't know anything about rationing when I was born, and really didn't. It was a background to my family's life, and it had a big effect upon people because they did feel very hard done by. And a lot of people bought food and other things on the black market and effectively entered into a criminal life without really realizing that they would be in big trouble. So it was a murky kind of setting where there were out and out villains, and then there were people who were kind of stretching things a bit and hoping to get away with it.
And it does provide actually a nice contrast to that other view of Oxford. We spoke about the dreaming spires. Well, those spires cast shadows, and there are people in the shadows.
Yeah.
And in your book, you get to see another side of Oxford, as well as the separation between legal and illegal, as well as town and gown. Those who are part of the university and those who are actually part of the town itself.
Yes, yeah. I think I wrote some notes and just looking here as well, but I also wanted to stress his Irish connections because it's not really written about enough. He was considered a bit of an outsider by quite a few, I think, more snobbish English dons. There was nothing like snobbish English people in the 1940s. Although the war had democratised people to some extent, but life in Britain these days, in England, is very different from the way it was. And what I'd love is for younger people to read this book and to find out what it was like, as well as older people who are sort of nostalgic for those times. Lucy's house she shares with her father, who is a scout at Christchurch, is effectively the tiny little house that I grew up in. So it was lovely to bring all that background into it. But the Irish connection, I think he was just because he was such an unusual man. He was a maverick, really, and the best detectives are mavericks. His Irishness would have been part of that, and I do have that when I bring the character of Liam into it, who is a friend of Alfred, Lucy's father. It's really Lewis's chance to talk to two working class men in a way that would have been somewhat frowned upon in Oxford establishment life. So they have to be careful which pubs they go into. And that was fun, researching the history of the pubs. You know, some have changed their names. One's called Jude the Obscure, lovely name for a pub now, but it used to be called, I think, the Prince of Wales. So I had to make sure that I got the name at the time right. And he had to go into pubs where other colleagues would not be drinking, or students, because he might be recognised, because he was quite a famous figure, as you know, having been on the cover of Time magazine with the headline Don versus Devil just a few months before My Action starts, which of course he hated that kind of elevation to celebrity. He was quite a very modest and unassuming man. And didn't really want to be treated like a celebrity, but he was.
Yeah. Well, I thoroughly enjoy this book. You mentioned that the sequel is coming.
Yes, yes.
How's that one going to be framed?
Well, Dorothy, as I said, is again in very much helping him with his sleuthing and giving him quite a few tips, because of course she's written her crime books as well, mystery books. And it's going to be partly set in Oxford and partly set in Soho, which was fantastic as a place. My late first husband, who was quite a bit older than me, came over from Ireland, because I'm half Irish myself. He came over from Ireland in 1950 and hit Soho, and he couldn't believe how fantastic it was. No book censorship for a start. There was censorship of literature in Ireland for sure. And he was quite a naive young man, he said, when he came over. He was 21 in 1950. And he saw sights. He didn't really understand what was going on, but worldlier colleagues, friends, chums had to tell him what was going on. And it's painters like Francis Bacon were mixing in all the pubs and so on and so on, and Lucy and Freud, and I have walk-on parts for those two as well. But two, just briefly. And, but it's really the criminal trail stretches from London to North London, from Oxford to North London to Soho. But Soho is it was a kind of all sorts of things were happening in Soho at the time. The police were actually quite frightened to go there, apparently, except in pairs, perhaps, because it was really a little sort of Liberty Hall right in the centre of London, and all sorts of forbidden goods and various other things. I can't say too much because of the plot, but I found it was a very rich scene to explore.
I bet. I remember when I first visited Soho, I must have been 23, 24, something like that. I just got out of university, and it was a shock for my angelic little self wandering around there for the first time.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's a Dante-esque journey, shall we say?
Yeah, you got to go through the Inferno first.
Yeah, quite. Yeah. So yes, and I have him being taken to some of the sites by his editor, who is a little alarmed that he started to write a children's book, and thinks, I think we better get him off that, that strange diversion into juvenilia, and get him back on writing adult books. So I thought he'd take him to Soho to introduce him to more things that he could write serious books about.
And his first thought was like, oh, we should evacuate all children from here. Wait, that gives me an idea.
But as we know, the Narnia books are very serious.
Mm-hmm. Well, Maureen, thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people go to pick up a copy of The Mystery of Rake?
Yeah, it's published by Swift Press, and it's available at all good bookshops and also on Amazon. But I must speak up for independent bookshops. Please, please support your local bookshop. I think there's also an ebook version as well. I mean, I kind of leave all that rather lazily to the publisher. Wonderful award-winning Swift Press, who have an amazing eclectic list, and I'm very glad to have been picked up by them. I felt my book was unusual, and I wasn't sure if it would find a place in publishers' lists, because people tend to, some publishers anyway, tend to sort of, they're just looking for something that replicates, the success of the time. They just want more of the same. And this was quite unusual. But I just had faith. What can I say? And he is such a, to use a word, a cult figure, rather kind of, I don't want to denigrate him, but he is much revered across the world. As I said, I wanted to be respectful of him, but at the same time playful, and to tease him a bit. I just wanted to get to the man, as well as the great writer. And the more research I did, the more it gave me plot ideas. But at a certain point, you've got to stop. If you're going to write a novel, you've got to stop the research at a certain point. You'll never, otherwise it'd be endless. And you've got to let the imagination take flight. Otherwise, it's just another attempt at a biography. And there are several wonderful examples of that. C.S. Lewis biographies already. But I've just gone off at a tangent, and I hope readers come with me.
Well, it reminded me of Paddy Callahan's book where she focuses on Joy's life and the intersection. And I think both of you achieve a very similar thing in terms of showing the nuances of the character, the layers of the character, and as I mentioned at the beginning, and the world that they lived in, because it's not the same as the world that we live in today.
Absolutely
and
not, no.
You can understand them much better if you can understand the world that shaped them.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you very much. I'm really honoured to have done this, and I'm so absolutely chuffed, to use another English word, that you like my book.
Good word. Well, we've been chuffed to have you on the show, and I'll put links to everything in the show notes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. All the very best. Bye-bye.
And viewers, please join us again next time, and we'll continue going further up and further in. Cheers.